From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
By her own description, Cassandra Clare spent her childhood at many points around the globe: Iran, France, England, Switzerland, with a trunk of fantasy books providing a form of constancy as her scenery kept changing. Ms. Clare went to high school in Los Angeles and eventually became an entertainment reporter in LA and in New York. But ultimately, by becoming a fiction writer, she created her own escape from some scary nonfiction creatures who were at the height of their dominion in the middle of last decade: Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, Brangelina. Subsequently, her Mortal Instruments trilogy offer fantastic departures for contemporary young minds, and despite their disturbing settings, some form of belonging. Her books are not trips to any rainbow-hued Candyland. It's really a dystopic vision. They explore darker possibilities as suggested by their redemption through destruction titles: City of Bones, City of Ashes, City of Glass, City of Fallen Angels, next City of Lost Souls, and after that, City of Heavenly Fire. In her Infernal Devices series, they will feature, when all three are published, when complete, Clockwork Angel, next Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess. You'll have to ask her why she left New York for the less menacing landscape of Massachusetts. Maybe it's just as haunted as the morbid Edward Gorey once suggested. She's here with us today, and she wanted us to know that her signing has already been completed. That was earlier this afternoon, but she'll be back on December 8th at the Bethesda Library, sponsored by Politics and Prose. But without further ado, please welcome Cassandra Clare.
Angle these down because I'm short. All right, so thank you guys all for coming out. It's great to see such a big crowd. I was going to read a little bit from Clockwork Prince, which hasn't been released yet, and then talk a little bit about the inspiration for the books, and then I was hoping that you guys would have questions for me. There's a microphone right there and a microphone right over there, and so I'll give you kind of a signal, and then you should start lining up at the microphones, and that's where you're going to be asking the questions from. So, Clockwork Prince is the sequel to Clockwork Angel. The part that I'm going to read shouldn't spoil Clockwork Angel for you if you haven't read it. Clockwork Angel for me was a lot of fun to write. It's set in my favorite city, London. I got to do a lot of exciting research, and I'll get to that in a minute, but first I'm going to read from the prologue, which is called The Outcast Dead. The fog was thick, muffling sound and sight. Where it parted, William Herondale could see the street rising ahead of him, slick and wet and black with rain, and he could hear the voices of the dead. Not all shadow hunters could hear ghosts, unless the ghosts chose to be heard, but Will was one of those who could. As he approached the old cemetery, their voices rose in a ragged chorus: wails and pleading, cries and snarls. This was not a peaceful burial ground, but Will knew that. It was not his first visit to the Crossbones graveyard near London Bridge. He did his best to block out the noises, hunching his shoulders so that his collar covered his ears, head down, a fine mist of rain dampening his black hair. The entrance to the cemetery was halfway down the block, a pair of wrought iron gates set into a high stone wall. Any mundane passing by would have observed nothing but a plot of overgrown land, part of an unnamed builder's yard. As Will neared the gate, something else no mundane would have seen materialized out of the fog: a great bronze knocker in the shape of a hand, the fingers bony and skeletal. With a grimace, Will reached out one of his own hands and lifted the knocker, letting it fall once, twice, 3 times, the hollow clank resounding through the night. Beyond the gates, mist rose like steam from the ground, obscuring the gleam of bone. Slowly the mist began to coalesce, taking on an eerie blue glow. Will put his hands to the bars of the gate, The cold of the metal seeped through his gloves into his bones, and he shivered. It was a more than ordinary cold. When ghosts rose, they drew energy from their surroundings, depriving the air around them of heat. The hairs on the back of Will's neck prickled and stood up as the blue mist formed into the shape of an old woman in a ragged dress and a white apron. "Hello, Molly," said Will. "You're looking particularly fine this evening, if I do say so." The ghost raised her head. Old Molly was a strong spirit. Even as moonlight speared through a gap in the clouds, she hardly looked transparent. Her body was solid, her hair twisted back in a thick yellow-gray coil over one shoulder, her rough red hands braced on her hips. Only her eyes were hollow, twin blue flames flickering in their depths. "William Herondale," she said. "Back again so soon?" She moved toward the gate with that gliding motion peculiar to ghosts. Her feet were bare and filthy, despite the fact that they never touched the ground. Will leaned against the gate. "You know I missed your pretty face." She grinned, her eyes flickering, and he caught a glimpse of the skull beneath the half-transparent skin. Overhead, the clouds had closed in on one another again, blocking out the moon. Idly, Will wondered what old Molly had done to get herself buried here, far from consecrated ground. Most of the wailing voices of the dead belonged to suicides, those outcast dead who could not be buried in a churchyard. Although Molly had managed to make the situation profitable for herself, so perhaps she didn't mind. She chortled. "What do you want, young shadow hunter?" "I have the, Malfast venom? I have the talons of a Morax demon, polished very fine." "No," Will said, "that's not what I need. I need 4-eye demon powders ground fine." Molly turned her head to the side and spat a tendril of blue fire. "Now what's a fine young man like you want with stuff like that?" Will just sighed inwardly. Molly's protests were part of the bargaining process. Magnus had already sent Will to Molly several times now, once for black candles that stuck to his skin like tar, once for the bones of an unborn child, and once for a bag of fairy eyes that dripped blood on his shirt. "You think I'm a fool," Molly went on. "This is a trap, isn't it? You Nephilim catch me selling this stuff, and it's the stick for me." "You're already dead," Will said. "I don't know what you think the clave could do to you now." "Pah!" Her hollow eyes flamed. "The prisons of the silent brothers beneath earth can hold either the living or the dead." Will held up his hands. "There are no tricks here. Surely you must have heard the rumors running about in Downworld. The clave has other things on its mind than tracking down ghosts who traffic in demon powders and fairy blood." He leaned forward. "I'll give you a good price." He drew a bag from his pocket. It clinked like coins rattling together. "They all fit your description, Molly." An eager look came over her dead face, and she solidified enough to take the bag from him. She plunged one hand into it and brought her palm out full of rings, gold wedding rings, each tied in a lover's knot at the top. Old Molly, like many ghosts, was always looking for that talisman, that lost piece of her past that would finally allow her to die. In her case, it was her wedding ring. She dropped the rings back in the bag, which vanished somewhere on her undead person, and handed him a folded sachet of powder in return. He slipped it into his jacket pocket just as she began to shimmer and fade. "Hold up there, Molly. That isn't all I came for tonight." The spirit flickered while greed warred with impatience and the effort of remaining visible. Finally, she grunted. "Very well. What else do you want?" Will hesitated. This was not something Magnus had sent him for. It was something he wanted for himself. "Love potions." Old Molly screamed with laughter. "Love potions? For you. It's not my way to turn down payment, but any man who looks like you has got no need of love potions, and that's a fact." "No," Will said. "I was looking for the opposite, something that might put an end to being in love. A hatred potion. I was hoping for something more like indifference or tolerance." She made a snorting noise. "I hardly like to tell you this, Nephilim, but if you want a girl to hate you, there's easy ways of making that happen. You don't need my help with the poor thing." And with that, she vanished, spinning away into the mists among the graves. Will, looking after her, sighed. "Not for her," he said under his breath, though there was no one to hear him. "For me." And he leaned his head against the cold iron gate. So that was from Clockwork Prince, which is coming out this December. I'm actually also here to talk about City of Fallen Angels, which is the 4th book in a series of 6 books about the Shadowhunters, or Nephilim, a secret society of warriors who live in New York and battle demons, both inner and outer. The protagonist is a girl named Clary Frey, who joins them and gets caught up in their battles as she discovers she comes from a Shadowhunter family. She also falls in love with a Shadowhunter whose past is as complex as hers. The companion series, Infernal Devices, which is the one I just read from, is about the ancestors of the characters in the Mortal Instruments and ties together some of the mysteries from the two books. I often get asked where my inspiration comes from. I was inspired to write both series by my love of old-school urban fantasy that mixes the real and the unreal. So you have motorcycle riding fairies and werewolf bars, as opposed to separating the two into a world of things that are not magic and a world of things that are. And I was also inspired by my overwhelming love of cities, especially New York. I believe all cities have a shadow self that I love to explore. Forgotten buildings, places that nobody goes, cemeteries that have been moved or closed off, ruined old hotels, things like that sort of have their own spirit, still exist. We don't use them, but I like the idea of a secret society that could see them differently than we do, and did use them. So I love to explore cities. I've been enjoying exploring London and New York for both the Infernal Devices and the Mortal Instruments, and I'm going to start researching Los Angeles soon for another project that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. I'd been living in New York for 2 years when I started writing City of Bones. Part of me thought it would be great if I set the book where I live, then I won't have to do any research. But I couldn't have been more wrong. There's all sorts of secret corners of cities that even if you pass them every day, you don't know about them, you don't really look at them or stop to think about them. And so I started digging up things about the history of New York and reading books like Forgotten New York and that sort of thing. And I'll tell you, researching a city can be a little bit dangerous. One of the things that really caught my attention was this old smallpox hospital that's on a island between New York and Queens. And if you drive up the FDR, which takes you up the east side of Manhattan, you can see it, usually lit up at night, this big old Gothic building. It's clear that the roof has fallen in and no one's using it. So why is it still there? So I convinced my good friend, Holly Black, who wrote the Spiderwick Chronicles, to help me out. And she had earlier made me put her in the trunk of my car and drive her around so she would know what it was like to be driven around in the trunk of a car. Because she was writing a mobster book, and I spent the whole time worried that I was going to get pulled over, because if you get pulled over and they look in your trunk and they're like, there's a person in your trunk, you can't really be like, she wants to be there. So I figured she owed me. And she was like also one of the only people I knew who had who was willing to do this. So she came down and she drove me over to Roosevelt Island, which is where the smallpox hospital turned out to be, the very southern end of Roosevelt Island, which is now mostly hospitals and a few apartment buildings. And so we drove down to these big gates that said, keep out, no trespassing. But Holly said, they don't really mean that. And so we sneaked on through. And so I got up close to the building and started taking pictures of it. And I wandered away so I could get some pictures from a distance. And when I came back, there were the police, and they were talking to Holly, who is terrible with the police. So she was looking like she was going to run. And I came up and said, what's the problem? And they said, well, you're not supposed to be here. And they were looking at us because I think mostly who breaks in there is, kids who want to, set off fireworks and drink. And they were like, what are you two ladies doing, hanging around this broken down building? And so I said, well, you see, officers, I'm doing a research project. I'm writing a novel, and I really needed to get some photos. And they looked a little interested, and they were like, are you writing a history of New York? And I said, no, it's about demons. So they kicked us out. But, all in the name of research. And then more recently, I was researching in London. And I was with a friend of mine, Sarah Reese Brennan, who also a writer and amateur historian, and she was taking me around the area around Westminster Abbey, which used to be a very bad, rundown neighborhood in the time period that I'm writing in. And we were trying to pick a kind of a bad-looking house in a bad neighborhood that we might be able to use. And she was showing me all these details. You know, this isn't this great. You know, these are really Victorian-era gutters, and these are Victorian-era chimneys. And I was taking lots of pictures, you know. And we got to a courtyard, and she said, this courtyard is really Victorian. So we went into the courtyard. Holly, who was also there, was waiting for us outside. And so we went in, and she started pointing out, you know, more things that I should take pictures of. And she said, that window over there, really Victorian. So I took a picture of it, and only as the flash went off did I realize there was somebody inside. So, of course, it's an apartment building. And that it was a man who was stark naked and making eggs. So he looked at us, and we looked at him, and then he went like this. So then I ran away. We ran running by Holly at the entrance to the courtyard. She said, I don't even want to know what you've been doing. So I just wanted to share a few stories about the fearless sort of research that goes into researching for these kind of books. And if you guys could line up at the microphones, I'm going to start doing questions. So you're welcome to ask about the books, writing, the character, anything you particularly want to know that you think I might know. I might or might not know the answer. All right. Balance my iPad. Okay, start there.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for being here so much. I was wondering, like, how big of a part you had in, like, the movie for City of Bones, and, like, who's being cast and that kind of thing.
I guess I would say medium. I mean, usually, from what I've observed with my friends who've had movies made out of their books, the role of the author is pretty minimal. They buy the rights to make a movie out of your book, and then they pretty much don't need to hear from you again. Sony, who bought the rights for my book, have been pretty good about wanting my input. Whoops. And there goes my water. You know, asking me questions, calling up for details. Thank you. I didn't know that they had cast Clary until after they had already done it. And they had sent me the info on her. Fortunately, I liked her, Lily Collins. I thought she was really a good combination of Clary, sort of vulnerability and strength. So I was happy, which is lucky because could have been anybody. And then the Jace audition thing took much longer. It was like, well, they auditioned like 140 people. And they would send me, every time they were pleased with an audition, they would send it to me. So there's probably 100 auditions I didn't see that they didn't like, and about 40 that they did like. And they all had to go around. The problem is, like, I don't get the last say on anything. So I can say, I like that audition. And that counts, I think, in favor of that person. They say the author likes him, and they'll kind of pass it on. It'll go higher up the food chain. But the person who gets the sign-off on everything is the president of Sony. So everybody had to like the person who actually got picked, which was Jamie Campbell Bower. He had to audition twice. Both times he had to fly back and forth from London, and they had to pull Lily off the set of what she was doing and bring them together and get them to audition. But he really, the second time, really knocked it out of the park, did a great job. Everybody loved it, so I'm pretty confident that they got the right guy. It took months to find him. So I was happy about that, and I felt like I mean, they did call me, and they did want to know, what I thought, and I was happy about that. And now they're both Clary and Jamie were cast off of fragments of the script because the script wasn't complete. So now they're completing the script before they do anything else. And they've been in contact with me, asking me questions about Nephilim, what can they do? Demons, what are their powers? What about this specific thing? What about this thing? Down the road, is this important or can we cut it? So they've been pretty good about being in touch.
Thank you.
Sure.
What is the City of Lost Souls going to be about?
Well, okay. Well, I don't want to give any major spoilers, but City of Fallen Angels ends on kind of a brutal cliffhanger for those who have read it. Yeah, I know. Everyone's like, thanks a lot. So it does resolve that cliffhanger pretty quickly, and you find out what happened and what's going on with Jace. It's mostly I guess thematically the books are sort of about temptation, fall, and redemption. So this is the fall part. Everybody gets tempted in the first book to do bad things. This is the book where they all deal with the repercussions, and it gets pretty dark. We go all over the world with the characters: Paris, Prague, Amsterdam, Venice, New York. I'm going to travel around a lot with them as they search for different magical objects. And I don't know, see if evil triumphs over good or what happens this time.
Hi. I wanted to know who inspired your bad guys? Like, were you ever picked on as a kid?
Who inspired the
Bad guys.
bad guys? Well, the identity of the bad guy in Clockwork Angel is sort of a mystery, so it's hard to say too much about him except that I specifically didn't want him to be a supernatural creature. I wanted them to have to face down a normal human being for change. And Valentine, who we all know from Mortal Instruments, was inspired by Hitler. A lot of his speeches are sort of taken from Hitler's speeches, and a lot of his the loyalty oaths and the circle and how it developed and stuff is sort of taken from that part of history. So not really people who picked on me. Larger evil than that.
Thank you.
I just have to ask, where in the world did you get the idea for Magnus Vane's character? And if it's someone that you know, who was it?
It is someone that I know. Not sure he really would want to be identified. Maybe. I mean, I think he's pleased about it. But it's a friend of mine. We'll call him John. And we used to go dancing in New York together, and he was like the only person I knew who could basically cover himself in glitter and none of it would ever come off. It was like his superpower. And so we were down at the place called The Bank, which is basically what Pandemonium Club was based on. Was once a bank, now it's a trance goth club. And we were dancing, and it got late, and we were tired, and we left, and we were thirsty. And John is still covered head to toe in glitter. He's wearing like bubble wrap or something in glitter. And I was used to this, so I didn't really notice by that point. And he would stick up his hair with rainbow glitter. And unlike Magnus, he wore glasses, so it was extra funny. And we wanted to go to Sbarro, I think, which is, if you don't know it, not a very great Italian chain, but we were really, really thirsty, and he really wanted pizza. So we went over to Sbarro, and as we walked in, I went up to the counter with John, who also actually has a thick British accent, and he said, we want 2 Cokes, please. And the woman behind the counter turned around and looked at him, and she dropped everything she was holding, and she just stared, and she said, "Never in my life have I seen a man so shiny." And I said, "I'm gonna put you in a book one day." So that was Magnus. I mean, the thing I like about Magnus is, despite his crazy outfits and his penchant for putting glitter all over himself, he's really actually stable, really smart, really balanced guy, probably the least neurotic of every single one of the characters. So, it's not what you wear. It's what you like.
Hi. First thing I was going to say is I was getting my book signed by Lauren Miracle. She said hi. And second was, one of my favorite quotes from your books is from Jace, and he says, I'm a man and men do not consume pink drinks. Get thee gone, woman, and bring me something brown. How do you come up with those amazing responses?
Oh God, I can't even remember the pink drink thing where it came from, but I think I was at a wedding. And it was one of those weddings where they have signature beverages, which I think is really weird. Like, why now at weddings must we have a signature cocktail? But they did, and it was pink. And so I heard some guy muttering about, as they went up to get the drink. Of course it was pink, pink's the color of love or whatever, but I heard some guy muttering in line as he went up there that he wasn't going to drink anything pink. Because pink was not a manly color. So it stuck in my head. And then, years down the line, creating this party, and my memory of this guy objecting to drinking anything pink popped into my head. I think it's just a matter of remembering the funny things you hear or see, adapting them, and having also a unique voice for each character. I mean, Simon's funny, Jace is funny, Magnus is funny, but they're not all funny the same way. Something Magnus says is not going to be something Jace says. So I think giving each character a unique voice and a viewpoint on the world is fun because it becomes fun it's funny to read in the same way that it's funny to hear your friends say things because you think, oh yeah, that's such a John thing to say. And it's the same way with characters.
Just to add on that, I always quote Jace at the weirdest times. But do you ever like? Okay, this is really weird because I'm like hearing myself. But do you ever have to write? Like if you feel something or you see something and you just feel like you have to write?
Well, I mean, sure, in the sense of feeling like having an experience and feeling compelled to write about it.
Yeah, but do you ever like see something and you know that like that can mean so much to so many people and it can mean so much to the characters?
Oh, I mean, I do think about my readers when I'm writing, but I never think about it that way. I think about the characters. They pop into my head as real people all of the time. So if I overhear something or I see something, that reminds me of one of them, I think about how they would experience, that thing. And, sometimes it'll pop up in the book, sometimes it won't. But it's fun to think about it that way. And there's definitely things I've experienced in my life, or even just dynamics that I've noticed between friends and things like that have fascinated me. And I thought, well, I want to write about a relationship like that, or I want to write about a conversation like that. And those things, they worm themselves into your subconscious and then out onto the page.
And would Magnus ever have a magnificent makeup line?
Wait, what?
Would Magnus ever have a makeup line?
Will Magnus ever have a makeup line? If some makeup company wants to produce one and buy the rights, I'm sure that neither Magnus nor I would care. I would just need to think of a name for it. Maybe Magnificent. All right.
I'm curious about your use of prologues. You did it in Clockwork Angel and a couple of the first Mortal Instruments series, but I just started City of Glass and there was no prologue, and it caught me off guard. I was like, whoa. So, I'm wondering whether you feel a prologue adds to a book or what it detracts. I write, and I was wondering, do I leave this prologue in here? Do I dun 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 to get people reading, or do you throw it out and you put that stuff in later? How do you decide?
A prologue is necessary if it can give the reader a piece of information that they can't get any other way. There's a prologue in City of Ashes because if you don't see that prologue, you don't know what Valentine's doing because there's nobody else in a narrative position to tell you. And ditto, there's a prologue in Clockwork Angel because the things that happen in the prologue take place months before the action of the book. So again, unless you wanted to stick in a giant flashback, which is awkward, there's no other way to get that information. So I would say that in most cases, you have to, if you're going to put in a prologue, and I'm pro prologue. I know some people don't like them, but I really do. I love prologues. I love epilogues. I like the way they bookend a book, but you don't need them unless they're giving you information that there's no other way that you can get.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have two questions. One, what is your inspiration for each character? And two, in City of Fallen Angels, what made you kind of think that, what made you make Simon quote unquote vampire?
Okay.
Could,
Is there anybody, do you want to come up here and ask? Can hear you. Sorry. What's the inspiration? All right, well, the first question was what was the inspiration for each character, and we don't want to run down the line of every single one of them because that would take a long time. But usually characters are a composite of people I know, people, pure imagination, people I've read about, characters I've loved in books and movies and television and historical figures, usually all so mashed up that by the time that the character hits the page, even the person it was originally based on doesn't recognize themselves anymore. Or you get awkward things like my best friend's mother edged up to me once and said, "Is Valentine based on my ex-husband?" And I was like, I don't even know him. No. Weird, though. So, yeah, people are never going to pick up on the characters that are based on them. So don't worry about that. Oh, the other question was why make Simon a vampire? So sorry for those of you who have not read book 2. But I made Simon a vampire because, I mean, I always knew he was going to be. There's a lot of hinting at that's what's going to happen to him in book 1. Because there was no way of showing how dangerous Downworld is, why the Shadowhunters keep it so secret, so safe from ordinary mundanes, why they expend so much energy on making sure the world stays separate unless we show what happens to an ordinary mundane if they wander into Downworld, and that is bad things. You know, this world is far too dangerous, far too powerful, far too complicated for them to cope with, and indeed, it's too much for Simon. He becomes a Downworlder. Sorry. It was a way of showing that, because otherwise I felt like, you know, what are the Downworlders really hiding? You know, what are the Shadowhunters really hiding? I mean, are they really doing this for people's good? And I think that kind of shows that they are.
When you heard that they were going to make the movie and they were casting people, did you ever have any specific actors who you thought would be good for playing certain parts?
They optioned the rights to the movie about a year and a half before they even started with the production and the casting, and I've used to, as my kind introducer said, work in the entertainment industry, so I tried not to get attached to any particular actors because I knew that there was a very, very low % chance that anybody that I really, really liked was going to get cast, because it just normally doesn't work out that way. It's sort of like letting a balloon go and then being like, I really, really, really hope it lands in South Dakota. It might, but, you know, it also might not, and it's not a good idea to get way attached to the idea that it will. So I'm pretty happy with the cast they've picked so far, and I also think I'm glad that I never fastened on any particular actors and wanted them really, really badly, because that would have been sad if it didn't work out.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, my friend Christina says hi.
Hi.
And second, a lot of your chapter titles are the titles of poems or lines from poems, and I was wondering if reading them before reading the chapter would give hints to what was happening, or you just like the way they sounded?
I think I really try to make them thematically tied into the contents of the chapter. I try not to just, you know, think, I like this phrase, I'm going to toss it in. Sometimes you need to know the larger context of the poem. You know, it helps. But in general, I mean, I love poetry, and for my whole life I've been writing down poems that I liked or lines from poems that I liked in books. Now I do it on my computer, so I can go and do a helpful search if I need to. But I try to keep the titles of the chapters tied into the events of the chapters, even if they are a line from a poem. I'm trying to think of something specific, like the chapter "This Guilty Blood" in City of Glass was all about Jace finding out this thing about himself that made him feel that blood was cursed and that he was cursed. And so I felt like, you know, thematically it worked together, even though it's a line from a poem.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. When I first started reading City of Bones, I was exactly Clary's age, so I thought that was pretty cool. And I just wanted to thank you for growing up with such great characters throughout high school. And I was just wondering which character is your favorite character to write about?
Oh, it's really tough to pick a favorite character to write about, because I love writing about them all in different ways. I love Clary because she's a strong girl. It's great to write about that. I love Tessa because she's strong in a different way, and I love her because she loves books, and so do I. I guess I would say that Magnus is probably the most fun. Like I'm always happy when there's a scene with him in it, because it's sort of, I know it's going to be fun to write about him. And I would say that Simon and Tessa are the ones who are the most like me.
Hi, I heard that you used to write fan fiction. Would you say that helped start your career?
I think that any kind of writing that you do is helpful, no matter what, to writing fiction. I think if you write fan fiction, if you write nonfiction, if you write technical writing, if you did what I did and write journalism for 6 or 7 years, it's all helpful because it's all writing. And honestly, the best thing that you can do for yourself to get yourself to a point that will kick off, a professional career in writing is make writing part of your daily life, because I think a lot of people sit around going, when will I be inspired? When will I feel like, I'm waiting for the great white light of inspiration to hit me, and then I'll write something, but that'll never happen if you wait. You have to write first, and the writing will make you inspired rather than being inspired to write.
Oh, one more thing. I was wondering how you started writing fan fiction.
My friends made me watch the Lord of the Rings movie like 11 times, and by the 11th time, I was about ready to kill myself. So I decided that it was a good idea to do a project instead. So I started, I went home and I wrote a series of spoof diary entries of the Lord of the Rings characters written as if Bridget Jones had written them. I believe the first one was Aragorn's diary. Walked 40 miles, skinned a squirrel and ate it. Hate these hobbits, still not king.
Hi, I was just wondering, when in the Infernal Devices, why did you go back to like 1865, to like Jace's like great grandfather?
Well, it could be his great granduncle. We don't know yet. When I first pitched the idea, my editor also was equally puzzled that why I wanted to do that. And partly it's because that's my absolute favorite period in history, that mid to later Victorian age in London. And partly it's because one of the themes of the books I've always felt is that the past comes forward to influence the future. And I felt like if I was going to do a prequel, I wanted to set it in the past, and I wanted to bury all this stuff in it that would, as you read it, so you could read the books in either order. You could either read the Infernal Devices first and have that stuff explained later in Mortal Instruments, or you could read Mortal Instruments first and go back, and as you're reading Infernal Devices, be like, oh, that's where Church of the Cat comes from. That's how Isabel got her ruby necklace. Oh, that's what Magnus was talking about. And I really love creating the connections between the two books, so that's why I wanted to do that.
Hi, I just want to say that I'm a huge fantasy fan, and I loved Mortal Instruments. But I'm just wondering, what was your inspiration to write Mortal Instruments, like in general?
I mean, sort of like I was saying before, there's no like big white light moment. I'd been sort of fiddling around with the idea of writing a book set in New York that was contemporary fantasy, and thinking about settings and thinking about characters. And then I was in a tattoo shop with a friend of mine down in the East Village, and she showed me a set of tattoos that she had designed that were based on runes. She started talking to me about how the development of tattoos and how they had originally been put, on the bodies of warriors in ancient times, because they believed that they would protect them from injuries in battles, and that this was cross-cultural. The Norse did it, the Pictish did it, the Maori did it, and so I'm always fascinated when something like that, a myth like that, like crosses culture and time barriers, because it seems to me that it must have some truth at its center that really speaks to us as people. And so I thought, what about a series about a group of modern-day demon hunters, and they use these tattoos, and they really work. And so that was the spark idea, and I went home and started trying to develop the magic system.
Hi, yes. So I'm a writer myself, and I cannot stand outlines. And I know that there's other authors out there who write as they go along, and I wanted to know if that's what you do too.
Right, we call them planners and pantsers. You are a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants. I admire that. I am not a risk taker like that. I do a general outline plot first and think about it for a while, and then I generally gather a group of my friends together, and we do what we call a micro plot, which means every chapter is planned out ahead of time, everything that happens in the chapter, everything that happens in the next chapter, so that the whole story is told and like the general kinks are worked out ahead of time before I start writing, and I pretty much know where the story is going to go. And I mean, there is no one perfect way to write a book, so that's the way that works for me. But, I also have friends who just do what you do and just write, no outline, and it works for them. So you just have to find the system that works the best for you.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say I really liked your hair. And did you always know where you wanted the books to end with?
I always know where I want the series to end. With with the City of books, it's kind of interesting because I knew I wanted them to end with City of Glass. And then I was going to do a spin-off series as a graphic novel. And for long business-related reasons, that didn't work out. And so I wound up turning the spin-off series into a second series. So I think of the TMI books as 2 trilogies. Like there's one complete arc that ends with City of Glass, and then there's a second complete arc about the same characters. And City of Fallen Angels is kind of a reset button. Like everybody's happy. You hit that reset button. Nobody's happy. And, you know, we have a whole new story, a whole new arc, new villain, new developments. But with both series, I guess I would say all 3 trilogies, I've always known where I wanted them to end.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 5 more minutes. So, lightning round. Okay, go.
One of my favorite parts about City of Fallen Angels, I absolutely loved your character, Jordan Kyle, and the interactions between him and Simon and Jace were just absolutely fantastic. Did you always know that you were going to bring him into the story? Kind of he's mentioned but never explored, and then he's there.
Yeah, he was supposed to be a big character in the graphic novel. He was supposed to, because the spin-off graphic novel was more about Simon, and he was supposed to basically show up as Simon's roommate in a totally different city, not even New York, and Simon was going to figure out who he was. But so he was always supposed to have his own part, but since I recast that whole story and brought it back to New York, it was fun to bring him in that context with all the people who knew him and kind of develop this bromance with him and Simon and Jace, where they all spend their time arguing over who's going to use the we. So I really, he's a really fun character to write about too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I was just wondering, when you started writing the first book, did you already have the entire plan for City of Glass, or did you get halfway through it and then were like, inspiration, and then it just started to build up on it?
I had the whole 3 books planned out in advance, and I knew it was going to happen at the end of City of Glass. There are definitely things that changed along the way, but I would say that while the way to the end changed, the actual destination end didn't change at all.
I was wondering if there's ever been a book a character you've ever written for but never really developed into the story?
You mean had an idea for a character but never actually put them into the story? I'm trying to think. The only person I can think of is if you've read Clockwork Angel, is Tessa's aunt, who was a much bigger character in the original outline, and then finally the book actually starts after she's dead now. So we don't really get to know her all that well. But she was a big character of her own at one point. I was sad to see her go.
My friend would like to know if you still ship Hermione in Harry Potter fanfiction.
I haven't seen any of the Harry Potter movies since the 3rd one. I haven't read any of the books since the last one. I think I am unqualified to vote.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm a writer too, and I know you have people that when you're writing a book, you have to push because there's a deadline. I have 12 novels in the writing, and I just get 1 chapter into it, and I think of another idea, and I just stop. How do you keep yourself going in writing?
Oh, that's actually the trick. That's the hard part of writing. And that's why I do an outline, because if I know what's happening next, then I don't have that moment where I stop and I'm like, I don't know what's happening next. I can't go on. So, you may be somebody who would really benefit from doing an outline. And there's a bunch of links on my site to how to do outlines, and even people who run courses in outlining. So you might want to look into those.
Hi, so I'd like to say, first of all, love your series, absolutely brilliant. And I know that for authors, a lot of times if you're writing a book, sometimes you have these great ideas for scenes or characters that for whatever reason just never make it onto the printed page. Are there any particular scenes or ideas that you loved in the series but for whatever reason just didn't end up in the books?
There was a whole subplot in City of Ashes that got cut about Valentine murdering children in New York. And it was extremely gruesome. I really liked it, but my editor was like, "Whoa." So, that all went, and I did kind of enjoy it. It also, in fact, involved Valentine appearing on TV at one point. So I'm kind of sad that had to go because it was truly bizarre, but my editor was like, nobody wants to read about this many kids being killed. And I was like, all right.
Thank you.
I got 1 minute, so okay, go.
Who do you think was the scariest, creepiest character you ever wrote about?
The scariest, freakiest character that I ever wrote about. I think Sebastian was scary. Valentine, I think of as the kind of guy who really believes in what he's doing. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and everything he does is in service of this goal. And even though it's incredibly misguided, he has a generalized sense of right and wrong. Whereas Sebastian, bashes in a 9-year-old's head with a hammer, has no feelings, has no emotions, totally without empathy for other human beings. And I don't think there's anything that he wouldn't do. So to me, that's more frightening.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Wait, do you have a question? All right. I think you have time.
Well, I was wondering what you felt like as an author about this whole banned books thing that I've been hearing a lot about. That people basically have like gone to libraries, or only parents, I think, saying, "I don't think my child should be reading this. This should not be in the library."
I think that it is up to every parent to be comfortable with what their own children read, but I don't think that it is up to them to decide what other people's children should read. Thank you very much for having me. It was great.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.